He tried to sell my house for his mistress. I signed papers that made him tremble. June Matthews stood just inside the modest bank lobby, her palms lightly gripping the strap of her worn leather purse. The late afternoon sun filtered through the high windows, casting shadows that danced softly on the faded tile floor. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the low hum of quiet conversations and the faint rustle of paperwork. To everyone around, she was just another face in the small town, an office manager who kept to herself, colorless in a backdrop that never expected much from her. But she carried a weight with her. The house on Maple Street, her late father's refuge, the only place anchoring her to memories she dared not forget. Today, she had come to the bank to ask about refinancing the mortgage. Nothing complicated, just routine, or so she thought. Fiddling with the edges of her coat sleeve, June moved toward the teller counter where Ted, her husband, was speaking with a young woman behind the glass. That's when a careless slip of words stole her breath before she could pull away. Ted chuckled, a low, familiar sound she dreaded. "Yeah, I'm just trying to find a new place for my lady friend," he joked, his voice light but sharp, eyes flashing with an unguarded smugness. June froze, the last of the world's warmth evaporating. The paper stacks shuffled on the counter as the teller gave a nervous, distracted smile. The phrase didn't belong in their quiet life. It was a crack in the facade she didn't expect to see so clearly. "Ted?" she whispered, stepping forward, her voice brittle and disbelieving. He glanced at her with that lazy grin, a smirk that could slice right through her. "June, relax. Just kidding around. Getting the papers sorted here, it's nothing." But June heard more than jest. There was a casual cruelty wrapped in his words, a careless disregard for her presence, for her feelings. Her throat tightened and the tight knot inside her chest deepened. She wanted to believe him, but the echo of that statement settled like ice. Her fingers trembled as she took the folder tediously past to her, the weight of the documents feeling suddenly heavier than the truth she hadn't faced yet. The house wasn't just numbers on paper anymore. It was at risk. Her sanctuary, her father's legacy. For a fleeting moment, June's eyes flicked to the windows where the dying sunlight cast long, somber lines across the linoleum, marking the end of a day that was about to rewrite everything she thought she knew about her life. She swallowed hard, forcing calm where only confusion and hurt wrestled inside. As the bank's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a silent question settled over June's heart. How much of her world had Ted already decided to sell away? And what would she do when the truth finally came crashing down? Outside, the street buzzed softly with neighbors returning from work, unaware that June's quiet life was unraveling just beyond their sight, inch by inch. Her lips pressed into a thin, resolute line. The first crack had appeared, and she knew deep inside this was only the beginning. The neighborhood barbecue was supposed to be a simple gathering, a chance for neighbors to meet, for children to run through sprinklers, and for laughter to echo across manicured lawns under the heavy Georgia sun. But for June Matthews, each cheer and casual hello seemed like a jarring soundtrack to a personal earthquake. She stood at the edge of the blurred crowd, gripping a paper plate with a half-eaten hot dog, but her appetite was gone, swallowed by the pit of cold disbelief settling deeper by the minute. It had started with a whispered conversation she'd overheard the day before at the bank. Ted's careless joke about finding a new place for his lady friend still echoing in her ears. Today, that joke wasn't a secret anymore. June edged closer to the picnic table where Ted leaned in, speaking loudly enough for some to catch. His voice was smooth, casual, carrying a confidence that left a sour taste in June's mouth. "Yeah, Gina and I are planning to move on up. New neighborhood, new life. Starting fresh." His smile was broad, triumphant, as if announcing a prize won. Gina, a slender woman with manicured nails and too bright lipstick, laughed, her voice bubbling with an ease June felt she could never replicate. They spoke of paint colors and garden designs, as if the Matthews house was already someone else's property. The words were daggers, but it wasn't just the betrayal. What stung most was the audience. Friends, neighbors, people June had shared Sunday potlucks and borrowed sugar from. All their eyes flicked to her, some pitying, others coldly curious. June's heart hammered loud enough to swallow the music of the barbecue. When an old friend, Nay, murmured, "I guess Ted really moved on, huh?" June's hand clenched tightly around the plate, the paper crinkling beneath her trembling fingers. Behind May's sympathetic eyes lay an unspoken question. How much had June really known? Had she been foolish, naive, or just invisible? Even worse was the sting from her boss, a man usually reserved but today unreserved in his judgment. At the office the next morning, a casual comment slipped out. "Honestly, June, did you ever see this coming? Sometimes we don't want to admit the signs until it's too late." The words hung in the stale air. Each syllable a reminder of June's isolation. She had always been underestimated, that quiet woman who kept her head down, never rocking the boat. But now, the very foundation of her life was exposed to flimsiness, scattered to the winds by her husband's betrayal, and worse, by those who dismissed her pain as a consequence of her own blindness. She remembered the late nights after work, walking the halls of the old house, running her hand along the faded wallpaper, imagining her father's voice, telling stories under the porch light. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a legacy. Now Ted was bartering it away for a new life with Gina, and June was left standing among whispers and sideways glances, the fragile thread of her dignity fraying under the weight of her heartbreak. Pushed aside by whispered judgments and the heavy gaze of old friends, June felt smaller than ever, as if she had vanished in broad daylight. Yet beneath the shame and the swelling humiliation something flickered, a spark of stubborn resolve, refusing to be snuffed out. Could she find a way through this storm? Could the woman no one noticed finally make herself seen? As the sun dipped low and the barbecue wound down, June's thoughts circled with mounting fear. How much had Ted already sold behind her back? And would there be any home left to save? In that quiet, crowded yard, with the laughter of others ringing hollow during her discovery, June vowed she wouldn't disappear quietly. But for now, the sting of betrayal left her exposed, alone on the edge of everything she ever cared about. Have you ever felt invisible, only to realize the fight to be seen was just beginning? The front door slammed with more force than June anticipated, making the framed family photos on the hallway wall sway just slightly. Ted's laughter echoed from the living room, light and cruel, mingling with the sharp click of a suitcase being zipped shut. June stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching a cup of lukewarm tea, the bitterness of betrayal twisting in her gut like a relentless storm. "June, come on," Ted called without turning around. "It's done." "Why are you still dredging this up?" But June's voice wouldn't quit, no matter how much she wanted it to. "Done? You're selling the house, our home, without asking me." Her words trembled, but her resolve was gathering strength beneath the surface. Ted smirked, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the kitchen table. "Look all you want. The papers are already signed. What's done is done." June sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of the reality she faced. She pulled the documents toward her, warily scanning the fine print, but it was like another language, dense and twisting, dotted with legal jargon that only seemed to cage her further. There were signatures, dates, and clauses she didn't understand, and some that didn't look right. Her pulse quickened, a flicker of hope sparked, though timid as a candle flickering against the wind. That evening, June sat at the kitchen island under the harsh glare of the overhead light, her eyes scanning and re-scanning the pages. The house still held a silent presence around her, the worn hardwood floors creaking underfoot, the familiar scent of aged cedar in the air. And yet it felt more like a fragile memory than a refuge. Each signature felt like a betrayal etched in black and white. She reached for her phone and called the local lawyer her father had once recommended, a kind woman named Miss Harper, with comforting patience in her tone. "These documents, something's not right. Could there be a way to stop this?" June's voice was barely above a whisper, a mix of hope and desperation. Miss Harper's response was cautious. "It's complicated, June. I'll need to see everything. Signatures, the paperwork, the timeline. Sometimes there are loopholes, sometimes not. But we'll look." With trembling hands, June handed the paperwork to the lawyer over the next few days, too afraid to fully believe that help could come. Meanwhile, Ted continued his life as if nothing was amiss, his smirks growing wider when rumors about Gina's new bedroom spread through their small town. Gina herself didn't hide. She lingered at the grocery store where June shopped, flaunting her new confidence in June's quiet shadow, arriving with designer bags and a misguided sense of entitlement. Each time June saw her smile, it was a reminder that Ted's betrayal was not just legal, but personal, a public display etched into every wary glance thrown her way. Yet despite the mounting pressure, June refused to disappear beneath it all. Late into the nights, she compared clauses, questioned every phrase, and taught herself to read between the lines of legal jargon. When the lawyers dismissed her concerns, June asked more questions, sought second opinions, shored up her resolve. Small victories, a question answered, a suspicious signature flagged, offered slivers of hope. Maybe this wasn't the final chapter after all. Still, the weight of setback pressed down, days stretching into a tense fog. She watched Ted move freely, all brazen smiles and careless steps, as if he already owned the future that belonged to her. But June's heart beat with a quiet drum. She wasn't finished fighting. She would prove that beneath her quiet, underestimated exterior lay steel. Every failed attempt only sharpened her will. Every small crack in the facade of Ted's plan, a foothold on the steep climb back to justice. How far would you go to reclaim what's yours, when every door seems closed, but the key has been in your hand all along? The knock came hard and sharp, breaking June's fragile silence like a thunderclap in the stillness of her kitchen. She opened the door to find a man in a crisp suit, official-looking papers in hand. The eviction notice gleamed in the fading afternoon light, the words stark and unforgiving. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope, the cold reality settling over her like a suffocating fog. "It's final," the man said quietly, glancing toward the manicured lawn across the street where neighbors lingered, peering from behind curtains and half-open blinds. "Your time here is up." For a moment, June stood rooted on the threshold of her childhood home, the place where her father's laughter once seemed to fill the rooms, where every corner bore the imprint of family memories. Now, it felt like a prison she was being ordered to leave, an unfamiliar stranger poised to claim everything she cherished. Then, across the street, a figure appeared, Gina, striding confidently onto June's porch, a measuring tape in hand, her posture brazen, almost triumphant. She paused, casting a calculated glance at June, her lips curving into a smug smile. "Just checking the windows," Gina said with a drip of condescension, extending the tape measure to the sill as if to emphasize ownership. "I want to make sure everything's perfect once I move in. You'll understand. It's important." June's mouth went dry as the neighbors gathered on their porches, eyes flicking back and forth like a silent jury. The hushed whispers and scrutinizing glances felt colder than the late afternoon breeze. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was a spectacle of humiliation broadcast to everyone she knew, the deepest betrayal laid bare. Sitting down on the chipped wooden steps, June wrapped her arms around her knees, feeling the weight of years crashing down. She could hear the soft rustle of curtains drawing, the unspoken judgment leaking out with the quiet curiosity of onlookers. Inside, her father's old clock ticked steadily, its measured rhythm a cruel contrast to the chaos swelling inside her heart. She crossed the creaking floorboards to her bedroom, a small, sunlit room where she had once dreamed of a peaceful future. The walls, faded and familiar, felt like they were closing in. Sinking to the edge of the bed, June allowed the tears to come, slow, silent, and unstoppable. For the first time, she admitted to herself just how deeply she had been deceived, how thoroughly her world had been upended. The house she had vowed to protect was being ripped from under her feet, not by chance, but by the cruel hands of the man she once trusted. Yet amidst the whirlwind of despair, a faint ember flickered in June's chest. She remembered the strength sewn into these walls, the legacy her father had left. She wasn't just a victim of betrayal. She was a woman on the brink, facing a choice: to crumble beneath the weight, or to rise, to fight, to reclaim what was hers. As the shadows lengthened outside and the neighborhood whispered their condolences in silence, June wiped her cheeks, her gaze steadying. The journey ahead would be hard, lonely and uncertain, but beneath the ache was a quiet courage taking root. Because sometimes, rock bottom is the sharpest edge before the climb back up. Have you ever felt the world fall away beneath you, only to discover the strength you never knew you had waiting to rise? The evening sun filtered through the slatted blinds of June's father's desk, dust particles dancing in the amber light like quiet keepsakes of the past. June sat cross-legged on the creaky wooden floor, the worn rug beneath her stretched thin in spots, the air thick with the scent of old paper and faint cedar, the familiar comfort of home. She was sifting through years of forgotten letters, faded photographs, and stacks of ledgers left untouched since her father's passing. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed focused, combing over the papers one by one, searching not just for answers, but the slender thread of hope she desperately needed. Somewhere in these faded relics, she thought, there had to be something Ted hadn't counted on. Her fingers brushed against a folded envelope, heavier and more substantial than the rest. Carefully, she unfolded the letter inside, the handwriting unmistakably her father's, meticulous, strong. A quiet echo of the man she had loved. Her breath hitched as she read, the words unraveling a secret she'd never known. The letter spoke of a family trust, a legal safeguard placed years ago by her father, designed to protect the Matthews home no matter what storms might come. And alongside it, tucked beneath the pages, lay a deed, not signed but unambiguous in its intent. The house was held in trust under June's name alone. Her heart pounded fiercely. This was more than a scrap of paper. It was a shield, a weapon against the cruel hand that had tried to strip her of everything. Ted must have never read this, or worse, chosen to ignore it. Either way, he had overlooked something vital. June folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. The quiet confidence she'd carried since her father's death now flared into something bolder, sharper. She reached for her phone and made the call to Miss Harper's office, her voice steadier with every word. I think there's more to this than I realized. The house, my name's on the trust. We need to act. The lawyer's reply was measured but encouraging. This changes everything, June. We'll need to move carefully, but you have a strong position. I'll prepare the documents to reaffirm your sole ownership. We'll make sure you're protected. For the first time in weeks, a small, fierce smile touched June's lips. In the quiet of that old room, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, she felt the power of knowledge settle in her bones. Ted's taunts, his smirks, even Gina's brazen intrusions suddenly seemed less intimidating. Late that night, when Ted's usual arrogances punctuated the quiet house with careless words, June met his sneers with a calm that surprised even herself. "You've missed a few pages, Ted," she said softly, the knowing glow in her eyes a silent warning. "I'm still the one who owns this house." He scoffed, though something flickered uneasily behind his gaze. June didn't say more. Not yet. Instead, she tucked her secret close, a quiet storm gathering beneath her measured exterior. The tide was shifting, and June was ready. Have you ever found a strength hidden deep inside that made the impossible suddenly seem within reach? The day of the sale dawned crisp and clear, the morning sun casting long, golden fingers over the quiet street. The air was heavy with anticipation, but not for June Matthews. She moved with calm purpose, the weight of weeks settling behind her shoulders like armor. The house she had fought so hard to protect stood proud, its worn porch steps still creaking beneath every steady footfall. Ted arrived first, all slick confidence and smug grins, his new companion Gina radiant beside him. She wore a vibrant dress too bright for the occasion, her laughter tinkling as she linked arms with Ted, playing the role of the triumphant lover perfectly. Ted's easy charm filled the small crowd gathered. Neighbors, the realtor, the notary, all waiting for what they believed was an inevitable conclusion. June stepped silently through the front door, meeting every familiar shadow and creak with an unshakable steadiness. She reserved no announcements, no grand speeches. Instead, with measured grace, she walked to the negotiation table. In her hand, the papers felt smooth and undeniable, their quiet authority contrasting sharply with Ted's careless swagger. "Here," June said softly, placing the documents in front of Ted, eyes unwavering. "You'll want to sign these." Ted glanced at the sheets, barely skimming, the eagerness to close the deal flickering in his eyes. His signature was already penciled in his mind, the money and Gina's new life waiting just steps away. But as the notary began to read aloud, the room shifted. "This document," the notary's voice rang clear and firm, "does not transfer ownership of the property. Instead, it officially revokes any claims Mr. Matthews may have on the estate, and affirms that Mrs. Matthews is the sole owner under the family trust." Whispers spread like wildfire. The realtor's mouth fell open. Gina's confident smile faltered, and Ted's face drained of color as the ground under his feet seemed to crumble. The very papers Ted thought would bind the house to Gina were wielded instead to strip him entirely of control. June watched him crumble, a man undone not by anger, but by the undeniable certainty of the law she had uncovered. The neighbors, once silent observers, caught the weight of the upheaval in their breaths, their eyes newfound with respect. Mingled with surprise, Ted's smirk twisted into something thin, uncertain, as he confronted the truth, glaring like a spotlight on the dreams he had built. Gina's gaze dropped, the confidence she wore like armor dissolving into the silence that filled the space between them. June's voice cut through, firm yet calm. "This house belonged to my family long before you came, and it will remain that way." In that moment, the quiet woman everyone overlooked transformed into someone no one could ignore. The power shift was absolute, a reckoning woven not from loud declarations, but from patience, perseverance, and the quiet wisdom of knowing her worth. As Ted stammered, searching for any shred of leverage, June met his gaze steadily. "You underestimated me," she said softly, "but now justice has its voice." The moment lingered, the room holding its breath. This was not just about a house. It was about reclaiming dignity, standing firm against betrayal, and proving that true strength often blooms in silence. Have you ever stood quietly, yet felt the world shift around you, because you refused to be forgotten? The room was thick with tension, the kind that makes every heartbeat audible. June Matthews stood tall, her hands steady as she faced Ted and Gina, whose smug grins had been a constant ache in her side for far too long. The realtor cleared his throat, eyes darting between the faded yellow sheets on the table and the quiet storm of a woman before him. "You have no claim here," June said, her voice calm but resolute. "This house is mine. The sale is null and void." Ted's smugness faltered for the first time. "You can't do this," he spat, lips curling with desperation. "Those papers you brought? Irrelevant. I did everything right." "No," June replied, eyes unwavering. "You didn't read the trust. You overlooked the deed my father left, signed years ago, secured long before you showed up." Gina's confident smile wavered. She glanced at Ted, confusion creasing her brow. What is she talking about? "The family trust," the notary explained, stepping forward. "Mrs. Matthews holds sole ownership. Any attempts to transfer the property without her consent are invalid." A flush of silence fell over the room as Ted's face drained of color. The bravado that once filled his stance collapsed into shaky defeat. His eyes flicked around, realizing the spotlight was on him, and the crowd witnessed his unraveling. Neighbors, who had gathered discreetly outside, now peered through windows and doorways, murmurs growing with every exchanged glance. Where once there had been whispered pity for June, there was now something different. Respect, gratitude even, for a woman who had quietly held on, who had refused to be broken. June stepped closer to Ted, her voice steady, but filled with the power of years spent enduring betrayal and humiliation. You underestimated me, and that was your biggest mistake. The realtor nodded quietly. We'll notify the buyers that the sale is canceled. The house will stay with Mrs. Matthews. Gina pulled Ted aside, shooting him a pointed look before turning away, her pride wounded but intact. Ted was left standing alone, his plans thwarted, his lies exposed. June breathed in deeply, feeling the weight shift from her shoulders. This wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming her life, affirming her worth, and standing tall after being pushed to the edge. The crowd outside began to disperse, but the newfound whispers of admiration trailed behind her like a quiet triumph. As Ted retreated, stripped of status and respect, June found herself buoyed by a courage that had once seemed elusive. The woman they thought invisible was now the story everyone would remember. Have you ever found the strength to stand tall when the world tried to knock you down, turning your quiet courage into undeniable power? The house on Maple Street breathed quietly in the late afternoon sun, its faded white siding glowing softly, the porch swing gently swaying in the warm breeze. June Matthews stood at the edge of her front yard, hands tucked into the pockets of her worn cardigan, the weight pressing on her chest noticeably lighter now. The neighborhood, once humming with gossip and judgment, had settled into a respectful hush that embraced her like a balm. There was peace here again. A fragile kind that felt earned and precious. For weeks, June had carried a storm inside, a tempest forged from betrayal, humiliation, and doubt. She'd been underestimated by so many, neighbors who whispered, colleagues who pitied, a husband who betrayed. But in quiet rooms and late-night hours, she had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The kind that comes not from loud declarations or grand gestures, but from steadfast patience, heartfelt kindness, and a refusal to let injustice define her. Her gaze drifted to the porch steps where faded paint peeled away, and for a moment she caught a memory. Her father's soft chuckle, the glow of the porch light on rainy nights, the creak of the door welcoming her home. The house was more than wood and nails. It was legacy, love, and resilience. June closed her eyes briefly, letting the breeze carry away the remnants of pain. It struck her how much she had learned, not just about law and property, but about herself, about how kindness, wielded with wisdom, was mightier than cruelty, how inner worth isn't dictated by others' opinions, but by the quiet truths we uphold when no one else is watching. Her phone vibrated, a message from a colleague offering heartfelt support, a simple line, "You showed us all how to stand strong." June smiled softly, the glow in her chest warming her more than the afternoon sun. She had outwitted disrespect not by fighting fire with fire, but by holding firm, rooted in empathy and justice. A car rolled past, and behind the wheel she glimpsed Gina, her once bold presence now diminished by consequence and solitude. June's heart softened, remembering that redemption and humility were gifts for everyone, not just herself. But now was her time, her home, her story. As she stepped onto the porch, June felt a renewal, not just of her space, but of her spirit. The neighborhood would remember the quiet woman who refused to be broken, who reclaimed her dignity with grace and courage. Have you ever been underestimated, only to find that the deepest strength lies not in volume, but in the steady, unyielding force of kindness and self-belief? If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.